the first person on my screen is Jessica Davidson. So first of all, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, a 5-minute intro about what your PhD was on, how you got into the role you have now, and just tell us about your journey from PhD to beyond that.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. And it's good to see so many people here and talk to historians again. I'm Jessica Davidson. I'm currently the Research Staff Development and Engagement Officer at King's College London. So beyond academia is only sort of beyond. It's kind of adjacent at the moment in my case. I'll come on to what exactly that means that I do at the minute, but I will start with a brief to talk about my PhD. That was a DPhil at Oxford in 18th century British history. I wrote about the social and cultural history of provincial fairs. I've submitted that in 2018, autumn of 2018, and that ended up being a kind of social and commercial history, but it aimed to, in the back of my head, I had always wanted to kind of talk more about community cohesion or the lack thereof. And I think those sorts of interests in kind of what holds groups together or separates them continues to inform some of the work that I'm doing now. But in terms of the career path to what I'm doing now, I had a kind of, I thought I'd stick it out in academia for a while, initially after the PhD. So I did someone's teaching cover at Oxford shortly after I submitted, teaching for a term at Exeter College, which was great. Then I did something else, which I'll come on to in a second. And then I worked at Keele University as a teaching fellow for about 18 months, mainly in the pandemic, sort of real heart of it. So that was the kind of more traditional academic path. But there had been a couple of pieces peppered in there that led me to where I am. So in that kind of unemployment period after submission, when you're trying to navigate your next steps, I happened to see advertised really via the temp agency at Oxford, a 3-month post, I think, was just about, 3 months, with the career service there to do something called Careers Outreach Fellowship. And what that was about surveying people, sort of either PGRs and ECRs in the humanities and social sciences divisions about the career support that was provided for them in their faculties or at Oxford generally. And so that meant I was engaging a bit more in university policies around employment, employability, and also talking to people about their lived experience. So a lot of focus groups, report writing, that kind of thing. And then coming around to what was going to happen to me next, this is now spring of last year when my teaching fellowship was coming to an end. That was the point that I decided I no longer wanted to sustain the kind of fixed term contract cycle. And so I moved over into, I guess, what we would now call, or what we call researcher development. So I don't know that I necessarily, it so happened that the position that I have now builds neatly on that Careers Outreach Fellowship. There was a bit of kind of, I'll see what sticks. I applied for a lot of jobs in this, or I thought about applying for a lot of jobs in this kind of academic adjacent space. And this is sort of the one that took. But it's quite interesting. I think it's a good stepping stone for other things on the sort of other side of higher education. What I do now basically is I work in our Center for Research Staff Development. So that's effectively the center that looks after postdocs, research assistants, teaching fellows, and technicians. And we do basically professional development support. So training courses, leadership, that kind of thing. And then also I do quite a lot of policy work, particularly surrounding research culture, which is kind of the working environment for researchers in higher education. And that's a big growth area. So I'll stop talking now because I feel like I've gone on for a while, but you can ask questions, or I'm sure more will come up as others give their stories.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great start. You sort of really hit the brief there. And yes, please send in your questions if you'd like to direct them just to Jessica or to the whole panel. We'll take them all. So next up, Michelle Johansson.
Hey everybody, hello. Just get comfortable in my chair there. Jessica, that was a great start. I didn't envy you having to go first there. I thought I was right next to Ellen and Rachel. I was thinking, oh no, it's going to be me. So thanks a lot for kicking us off. And also congratulations for putting together, I think, what's going to be a really interesting panel, because it seems like everyone's got quite different experience and quite different fields they've been working in. So hopefully everybody attending will get some useful information. Yeah, so I was going to start. I think I'm probably a bit older than everybody else on the panel, so my career might drag on for a little bit when I start to describe it. But I did a PhD in 2000 when I started it, and it was advertised as a PhD studentship, and it was the University of East London and Bishopsgate Institute, which is a library and cultural institution on the kind of borders of the city in the East End of London. And so, because it was a kind of joint partnership, and because I was going to try to do something, I mean, it was quite an open PhD studentship, and I could do anything about the cultural history of the Inner East End. And I thought I was going to do something about immigration, because that was something I'd looked at already as part of my master's degree. But when I went to look at the Institute's archives, just as a kind of courtesy to them, because they part-funded the studentship, I got really carried away by what I found in the archives. And I ended up doing a PhD about public librarians. And that was in the late Victorian and early kind of 20th century period, or kind of long 19th century. And I was looking at social mobility and professional networks. And that was what I did my PhD about. But very early on in the process of researching the PhD, the chief librarian then at the Bishopsgate Institute suggested that we put together a funding application to develop my research as a kind of play and putting on in the Institute a kind of live thing in the library, the history of the library. And so we got this bit of funding and we worked some actors. And so already I was on this kind of path outside academia completely by accident. And because I was spending all my time at Bishopsgate Institute while I was doing the PhD and none of my time at the University of East London, I never ended up doing any teaching at all in academia. All I was doing was this kind of these side projects at Bishopsgate Institute. So I kind of got involved with a project to develop a heritage project around an archive that had been discovered about an East End boys club. And I ended up running that project with lottery funding while I was doing my PhD. So by the time I finished my PhD, I was kind of freelancing as a heritage worker alongside the PhD work. So I'd moved into this completely different field. I ended up just applying for a couple of academic jobs at one stage or another towards the end of my PhD, but then carried on working as a freelancer at museums, galleries, and so on, and developing a lot of learning around using archives. So I worked with school groups, community groups, and I developed sessions for them that built up kind of an understanding of the past using historical archive materials. And then while all this was going on, and I had a job at Havery Museum in Romford, which was a new museum, and I was running their volunteer program. So I was developing schools programs and working with volunteers to run it. The Bishopsgate Institute, who of course I had a relationship with already, got a huge grant to refurbish the building. And as part of that grant, they were going to develop a schools and community learning program. So I went in on a freelance basis to develop this program, pilot sessions with schools, etc., etc. And it just ended up being something that I really loved doing. And so then when the grant kicked off and the Institute opened up a schools and community learning department, I was fairly well placed to get a job in there. And that's what I did. And then that department closed when the funding ran out. And that was in 2015, but because the Institute liked what I did, they developed a role for me called Interpretation Manager. And that's what I've ended up doing. So I'm Interpretation Manager at Bishopsgate Institute, which is a library and archive. The interpretation part of it isn't what you'd normally think of in the sector as interpretation, which is writing copy for panels in a sort of historic sites and venues. I don't really do that. What I ended up doing is interpreting the collections for different audiences. So I teach adult learners and informal learners. I help to support heritage projects. I work with some of our lunchtime concert performers on how they can create music out of our archives and that kind of thing. So it's a really wide-ranging role. And like I say, I've been there since 2015 doing this role, been there since 2010 full-time. So it's really outside of the academic sector. But I do still write and research on my PhD, and I still intend to turn it into a monograph kind of 10 years after the fact. So it's kind of really extended process. And I think I've probably been going on for ages now. So I'm going to stop, but I'm happy to kind of expand on this afterwards if anyone's interested. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Michelle. That was really rich. Yeah, we're already getting questions. So it's a great panel already. And you did remind me, I should say, this is pretty much Rachel's sort of construction this panel. She's put in loads of work, so finding people and inviting people. So yeah, thank you to Rachel before I forget to say that. So next up, Matt Neal, if you could speak to us.
Yes, thanks for inviting me to be on the panel. So my name is Matt Neal. My job title is Senior Policy Manager in Data Strategy for the Economic and Social Research Council, which is part of UKRI, or UK Research and Innovation. So my sort of journey to now is that I finished my PhD in the middle of 2012 at the University of Leicester. The PhD was about the title or something like Context of Crime in the 18th Century City. And it was basically a study of crime in the port city of Bristol, using depositions, so these very qualitatively rich, basically eyewitness testimonies to understand sort of crime in the urban context in the pre-modern city. Finished that in 2013, middle of 2012. And then I had sort of the rest of 2012 and 13. I think at one time I had about 5 jobs, the sort of typicals, doing some work editing a massive census data set. I was employed as a research assistant on an AHRC community kind of history engagement project, all very interesting work actually, which I still do, in job interviews refer back to and think about what I learned from that. But it was a very challenging kind of 18 months of finishing that PhD and just sort of stringing temporary contracts together. So by the end of 2013, I decided sort of enough was enough with that. And I got a job in fundraising for a classical music charity. Did that for a while, had another fundraising job, sort of major donor stuff in conservation. But for the sort of 3 or 4 years I was doing that, there was always this sort of nagging feeling that I had that PhD and the experience from that, and the sector specific knowledge wasn't being put to use at a wetland conservation charity, to be quite blunt. So then I took another career change to join ESRC, which is, as many of you will know, is one of the 7 councils within UK research innovation, and we fund social science research broadly defined at basically universities in the UK. With the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which is a sister research council of ours, we would be, I would imagine, the main funder of historical research, or one of the main funders of historical research in the UK. And ESRC funds about £200 million worth of funding per year for research. My team of data infrastructure, we fund about £40 million on data infrastructures. So what is a data infrastructure? Well, a research infrastructure is anything that researchers would use to do research. So, a space telescope is a research infrastructure. A county record office that as historians would use to do research is a research infrastructure. And a data infrastructure is basically a data-based research infrastructure that researchers need. So principally large data sets and large data collections and all the facilities that researchers would need to use those to do social science, including history within there. And my role within that specifically is to work on the strategic side of what, just mentioned some quite large numbers, what the investment of that taxpayers' money is going to be, and making that of maximal value to the researchers who depend on these infrastructures. So that's sort of the nature of the strategic investment and sort of what I do. I wonder if I might just try and talk through a little bit about that process a bit more. I don't want to bore you too much, but I mean, the way the research councils may be perceived from the outside are the sort of the 10 to 20% of the iceberg above the water, which is the sort of competitive funding round where you have to write an application and then you find out, you peer review and you find out whether you're unsuccessful or successful. But around that is a huge amount of consideration about when we do an open call. They're usually in data strategy kind of related things, be a very detailed sort of 6,000 to 10,000 word specification about what that should do, really in high levels of detail. And that requires a lot of consultation with sort of academic stakeholders, experts, with professors and stuff like that, but also early career researchers sometimes. And that's a key part, and the most enjoyable part of my job is actually all that stuff, that 80% below the waterline of all the strategic stuff of working out what should we fund and finding out about new research projects in areas that are often totally unrelated to history. I'm doing a lot on sort of early child development kind of stuff at the moment, which is really interesting. you know, and a lot of this is quite policy relevant as well. So we work with government as well to make sure that investment produces the impact that would justify, you know, the investment in the first place. And just to sort of conclude, I really would like to emphasize just how much I am using and taking forward the stuff that I learned in the PhD. So, you know, a key part of my work is also picking myself up here, but ability to write well, you know, to write clearly, sort of cogently, but robustly as well, you know, evidence-based way. And that's something, you know, I would really sort of see as coming from the PhD. And when we were to advertise for a job role in our team or in ESRC, that would very often be in there when we'd be looking for. A key thing that I do, because it's a strategic role, is bringing together lots of information from different documents, you know, research reports, meeting notes, conversations with professors, and bringing that together into a 3 to 4 page recommendation to sort of the directors of the organisation about what we should do. And again, that's a thing you would do in a PhD when you're bringing together, you know, the primary and secondary evidence and synthesising that. And I think historians, compared to any other types of researchers, are uniquely skilled at doing that, and writing well, I recall, was something that was more important in history than it would be in, say, chemistry or something like that. So those skills I picked up are still really important for a job in research and innovation, particularly sort of the strategic roles we would have in research councils, alongside, you know, teaching and the other stuff I did around my PhD. It's also been very useful because I spent a lot of my time presenting and arguing for things in meetings, and that was very helpful as well. So yeah, I think the PhD is not something I regret doing, even though I haven't really pursued it into an academic career. So yeah, that's me. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. That really interesting about the skills, the unique skills that historians possess. That's really, really fab. Sarah Murphy-Young next, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. So I did my PhD between 2017 and 2021, and it was a collaborative doctoral partnership between the University of Leeds and the Science Museum. And for my project, I focused on the development of a system of regulation for direct-to-consumer medical advertising. So basically, at the beginning of the 20th century, it's fairly unregulated, and then by like 1960s, 1970s, you have a very kind of full system of government regulation. And so I traced this, and this was like, the project was inspired by the medical advertising collection at the Science Museum. So yeah, this is what I focused on. Because I was looking at advertising regulation, I became quite interested in DCMS's work on regulating harmful or illegal online content, so like the online harms bill and stuff like this. So I kind of was like following that in the news, and I noticed that, so I was kind of like thinking about maybe going into policy after the PhD, and what I decided to do was to apply for one of the UKRI policy internship schemes. And my intention was to like be embedded in like one of the teams that focused on online harms. But in the end, I was placed with a team in Building Digital UK, which was, yeah, like rolling out super fast broadband across the UK. And I did this for 3 months in early 2020. So I started with the team like just before the lockdown. So I was like in the office for a few weeks, and then like ended up doing most of the internship from home. But it was really interesting. I worked with the evaluation team that was like, yeah, like looking at the sort of like well-being benefits and the sort of uplift that this scheme had across the UK. And like working with the team, I was kind of, yeah, like exposed to what like the department was doing, like what the Department of Digital was doing in particular. And yeah, just really enjoyed it, and became sort of really interested in, I guess, pursuing a career in policy at the civil service at DCMS specifically. And so a year goes by, I'm furiously typing up the thesis, and I'm starting to think about applying for work. And I've never, I've done a few internships. I've never followed it up with any email being hey, have you got any work? Or hey, I'm unemployed, have you got any job opportunities? But I decided to contact my supervisor from that team and had a chat with him. And initially it was a little bit disappointing. He was kind of yeah, there are not really any opportunities and stuff. I'm not really kind of aware of anything that might suit you. But after a few weeks, he actually sent me an email and was I really think you should apply for this job. And it was a Band B policy advisor in the Digital and Tech Directorate and in the Digital Markets team. And basically that team at the moment is creating a pro-competition regime for digital markets, which is basically a new regulatory regime to help regulate big tech firms and to make sure they're not abusing their market dominance. And he was yeah, I think you should apply for this. I think it's I think your skills really match this, this profile. And so I applied, and essentially by the time I'd handed in the thesis, I was interviewing for this role, and then and then they offered me the role. So I've been doing it since September, and it's been really great. I'm just really pushed. It's just really interesting. Everybody's really enthusiastic about the work that we're doing, and it's just such a great team. There are so many people from different disciplines, and with so many different types of expertise and experience and stuff, and they're all bringing so much to the work. And yeah, I just feel I am being pushed every day in terms of my skills and my knowledge, and yeah, it's really great. So I don't know when I started my my chat, but yeah, I guess what I'd like to emphasize is that again, yeah, a lot of the skills that you develop as a historian during the PhD are I am using those every day, and a lot of it is about communicating really complex stuff in a really simple way to people, either through writing, a lot of it is writing, but also in presentations and things like that. So yeah, really happy to discuss any part of this with anyone. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. That was another fantastic introduction. Yeah, so we'll move. I realised that you were perfect. Your time slot was brilliant, but I realised that we're sort of got an hour before we have to close. But Hannah Smith.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I did my PhD at Oxford in global and imperial history, and I was looking at First World War cemeteries and memorials. I finished in 2019, and since then I've been working in non-academic, or as Jessica said, kind of academic adjacent, it's hard to know how to define it, roles at the University of Oxford. And that was not always specifically my plan, but not an academic job was always the plan. So I applied for my first non-academic roles at the university in the limbo between handing in and Viva, and had the job offers before my Viva, which I think surprised my examiners a little bit. So it was, yeah, just an interesting path to kind of not even be considering academic roles and jump straight into professional services at the university. So I spent most of the last 3 years doing 2 half-time roles, so kind of cobbled together full-time employment from 2.5 FTE roles. One was on the Heritage Partnerships team at the Humanities Division, And specifically, my job was to support Oxford's partnership with the National Trust. So that involved things like developing and delivering training for National Trust staff, running conferences, workshops, symposiums, different kinds of events, bringing together academics and heritage professionals, supervising more than 100 interns who were Oxford students working on National Trust research projects, and supporting the development of research grant bids between the two institutions. And while I was doing that, my second other job at the time was on the university's central public engagement with research team. So that was based in research services. And my role on that team was grants coordinator. So I managed more than £1 million in internal funding for public engagement schemes. I got to develop and administer those schemes. And then my favorite part of the role was supporting the projects who were awarded funding. So just the variety was so huge, and there was always something new. So I was helping scientists develop an escape room, and another team of scientists were working on a dance workshop based on their research to bring into schools. We had a team from the English faculty who's doing a podcast on Lord of the Rings. So just all over the place. And I really enjoyed those mix of different opportunities. So I spent most of 3 years doing that, but then last week I just started a new job, still at the university, still in public engagement, but I've moved to the university's Center for Integrative Neuroimaging. So they work on brain and mind health and do MRI scans and things like that. And so I've only been in post for 9 days, but some of the things that I've gotten to do so far are support their collaboration with a local museum. So making plans for a joint exhibition they're doing. I'm going to be project managing a project where their researchers bring in early intervention tools for mental health to high schools. I'll be supporting another project that brings neuroscience to football matches, and also helping train their researchers in public engagement. Meanwhile, for the next 6 months, I'm also part of a program at the Ashmolean Museum called Talking Memory. And that is a program for early career researchers at Oxford to learn how to develop and deliver museum programming that's connected to research for older adults over 65. And so my new job very kindly said, you know what, that's a relevant skill for the work you do for us. Yes, you can do that during work time. So 2 or 3 days a month for the next 6 months, I'm at the Ashmolean instead of the Neuroscience Research Center. So very happy to talk about, kind of navigating that line of both being outside, but also kind of still connected to academia. Also very happy to talk about the kind of extra challenges of being an international student and navigating post-PhD life when visas are also a factor, and any other questions that I can help with.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Yes, Jessica was just nodding her head to say that you can both sort of speak on that point. Brilliant. So next up is Gabby, Gabrielle's story.
Hi, thanks very much again for inviting us all and for organising. So I hope this is useful. So for a bit of context, I was a self-funded part-time PhD student at the University of Winchester from 2016 to 2020, and I graduated in November 2020. Whilst I was doing my PhD, I worked part-time initially in retail, and then I moved on to local government admin, and that was kind of helpful when I finished the PhD because it meant I still had income coming in whilst I was looking for other jobs in academia. But I kind of realised as I was going on that working such long hours was kind of restrictive to being able to get publications out and to kind of looking at other avenues I might want to go down with history, because I've always been really interested in doing public engagement and kind of public facing history. I've done various amounts of podcasts, I've done little bits for the BBC, and whilst I was doing it, and I'm happy to talk about getting into those kind of avenues and venues as well if people want to talk about public engagement with their work. So I kind of made the jump in October last year to go freelance and do copy editing and to do archival research for people who weren't able to come to the UK in particular because of the pandemic. So yeah, I started doing kind of like offhand jobs between I think about June last year in terms of doing freelance work, but I kind of decided to take it up as a more full-time approach since October, and that's worked really well so far. I've been quite lucky that I've had a stable amount of requests come through. I've had the opportunity to work with loads of different documents in and outside my time period, because my PhD was on medieval rulership in England and France. So I already had a lot of archival experience, but doing the freelance work has really enabled me to build up my skills even further by looking at modern documents, looking at stuff in different languages, for example. And that experience has also led to me getting a temporary contract with the National Archives in London for a few months, working on a diversity project for them. And it's also meant that I've been offered some further work down the line for when I'm finished with TNA. So it is a big risk. I know, obviously, precarity and not having money either during or after the PhD is something we can probably all empathise with, and obviously chasing teaching and so on, or any other kind of research projects. So that was one side of it. In a way, I am still tied to academia. I do have a visiting research fellowship at the University of Winchester, which has been great because, as we all know, you still need access to books and things once you've finished, because you still want to be able to write, whether that's your monograph, whether that's articles, or just for any other projects you're spinning off. And I've also got the internship for History, the Journal of the Historical Association, as their ECR, which is from September 2021 to August 2022, and that is maintaining their website, curating blog posts, and a podcast series, which again is all public engagement stuff, which I really enjoy doing. So yeah, so I'm happy to kind of talk to anyone about like the balance between doing non-academic work whilst trying to pursue academic work, if that's what people are interested in, but also to talk about public engagement and public history, little bits around networking and that kind of thing as well, if anyone has questions. I hope that was okay.
That was more than okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Gabby, that was brilliant. So Rachel, did you want to ask your 2 questions that you prepared first, and then we'll move to the Q&A? So I'll hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you so much to our panel. It's really lovely to see such a diverse range of jobs and opportunities and perspectives that you all are giving us and the audience. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to be asking 2 quite broad questions, some bits of which have already been addressed, but I thought we could sort of open up discussions, particularly as these tend to be questions that people in the audience tend to have, whether they admit it or not, and just sort of get your perspectives on sort of your thinking when you were, I guess, in that position. So the first question, I think Jessica and Gabby to an extent have already started to address this. Did you always think about having a career outside academia, or were you going into the PhD thinking, I'm going to be an academic, I'm going to go, you know, and do whatever on the outside, teaching, maybe postdocs, lecturing, etc. And when did your thinking change? So did it change quite early on? Was it actually towards the end of the PhD? Or was it actually when you started applying for things? So I mean, not necessarily that you're not still trying potentially or combining it, but I guess when you decided to go more on the non-academic routes. And that's sort of open, sort of free for all to the panel. So please feel free to pop your hand up when you've got something you want to add, and we'll invite you to speak. Yes, Hannah.
So I had never, as I mentioned briefly in my intro, I did not plan on an academic job. And so I think my answer may be kind of the reverse to some of the other panelists, in that your question, Rachel, about when did your thinking change? For me, the change in thinking was, oh, maybe I'll stay a bit closer to academia than I thought I would. So I moved to the UK originally to do a master's in museum studies, and that was my background, was working in museums and heritage. And the plan was to go back to working in that field after the master's. But then just an incredible funded opportunity at Oxford came up, and I decided to go for it, got it, and did that. But the plan was always, well, I'll kind of go back into the museum world after the PhD. But I became involved in public engagement with research, kind of to an increasing amount during the PhD, and just increasingly thought, you know what, public engagement in an academic setting actually has a lot in common with what I enjoy about the museum world. And so I think that really did affect even the pressure I felt, or lack thereof, during the PhD, to not be having an academic job as the kind of the end goalpost. So in terms of when I started my search, when I handed in, it kind of in that limbo, I started looking. I was hoping to stay at Oxford initially, and I was lucky to be able to find jobs just from looking in Oxford before having to branch out further. And I was also very lucky to have DPhil supervisors who never ever questioned me on that plan. So I've heard from other colleagues who face some pressure from supervisors, kind of, why aren't you at least considering it? Why aren't you, try some applications? And then if that doesn't work out, try something else. But I think it was really important to me to never see a non-academic role as kind of a backup plan or a failure or something. It was plan A for me, and it was always really important to me to kind of make that clear. I even mentioned that in an interview once, because I was worried that they would kind of think that I had tried an academic career and then was kind of defaulting to this. So I can definitely vouch for the benefits of going straight for a non-academic role, if that's something that you're interested in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I think it's something that more and more people are now thinking about, and actually really should be plan A for more people, given the lack of academic jobs. I think it would be definitely worth thinking of it more as plan A than as plan B. So I think that's some really good advice. Jessica.
Yeah, I suppose in many ways, I think I probably have something of what was at least once the classic story here, in the sense that I went into the doctorate planning, hoping to have an academic career, probably was not hugely well informed about the probability of that succeeding. And unlike Hannah, unfortunately, I got what I would call some monumentally poor advice from my supervisor, which was just do the research and that will be enough, which is, of course, unfortunately not terribly realistic. And it's nice that he, in a chair at Oxford, can think that, but it's not true. So I have channeled my bitterness into something professional. No, the serious answer is, I think that I spent sort of the first stages of the PhD in the kind of blissful excitement about how exciting it was to be doing this and being surrounded by so many interesting people doing, work also in their own fields. And then I think as you approach the kind of end, you realize that you're going to need to have a more concrete plan than that, and probably think about spreading your options around, or even reassessing. Obviously now I work in professional development for people like you, so we all do have a lot of skills, even if we think we're just not just historians, but we are historians if that's our very being and everything that we know. I think it's really easy to repurpose a lot of skills, as Matt very meaningfully talked about, that you already have into extending somewhere beyond academia or near academia. So what made me then decide, okay, I'm getting out. I think, it's important to say we frame a lot of these discussions as though they're career discussions, but you are, of course, more than your career. You are a person with mental health, with a family, with financial needs, with other interests, with friends and people you care about. And at some point you have to decide what your priorities are. And if they are continuing to, stick it out in academia, more power to you, and I hope you get the right support. But only you can know what is right for you. And it's not an indictment of your worth or your research history or, you know, none of that. Only you can know what you can sustain. And I'm afraid that I don't think that academia is hugely sustainable on a lot of those kind of work-life balance fronts. So that was my tipping point, basically.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jessica. And I think it's really important to be very realistic and honest about actually trying to stick it out, because it is a very difficult experience to stick out. So I think you're right. Evaluating what's actually important to you is really, really important. Gabby.
Yeah, so when I started, I did still think about wanting to do a career in academia, you know, all throughout my BA and my MA and then onto my PhD. I was like, oh, I love researching, you know, I always want to find out more. Like, why wouldn't I want to go into lecturing or an academic position? And then you kind of become very acutely aware, I think about a year in, how bad the job market was, how difficult it was, the precarious nature of it, particularly as I started doing hourly paid lecturing as part of that experience. And I think because I hadn't had funding, and because I'd always worked alongside my degrees, I was kind of very conscious that I might want to pursue other avenues as I was going post PhD. I might want to look at other prospects. And like Jessica has really clearly said, we have a lot of other demands. There's things that we want to do beyond just being a historian. And actually, a historian is part of our identity. I don't think that maybe ever leaves us, no matter where we get in our career outside of academia. And yeah, I've really kind of got through this change. It changed because I've realised how precarious it is. And I know someone else has asked a question that maybe we can get onto about, you know, the job market now and situations moving forward. But I wouldn't say I've completely abandoned academia, in that I am in the process of applying for postdoc still at the moment, because I'm very recently finished. In a sense, it was only about 16 months ago maybe since I finished, so I'm still in that kind of process of applying for postdocs, but I'm very realistic that there are very few opportunities out there. It is increasingly competitive, and therefore the kind of public engagement, public history route is very much supported by freelance, and that's where I'm going at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important to say, just because you take a job that's either academic adjacent or sort of outside of the world, doesn't mean that you have abandoned completely the opportunity to try for postdocs and things like that. You are still, of course, able to do that potentially alongside other employment. So it isn't, if you are really, really, really concentrating on that as a career path, it actually might be worth considering both rather than one or the other. So thank you for that, Gabby. That was really helpful. Matt.
Yeah, my experience was literally exactly the same as what Jessica said, pretty much word for word. So I don't have a huge amount to say. I would just emphasize that, yeah, for me, it was about priorities, and actually having a full-time permanent job, you know, was a huge weight of sort of stress off my mind, and was a fantastic thing to get. And so that was very good. And just also the point about, in hindsight, my biggest regret out of all of this is just not recognizing those transferable skills that I had, making more of those earlier in my career. But yeah, so that's me.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And actually recognizing and using these transferable skills in job applications, job interview situations and things is actually really, really important, and is something that doesn't really get covered a lot when you're going through the PhD process. So thank you, that's actually really, really helpful. Sarah.
Yeah, like very, very similar. So don't have like a huge amount to add in terms of like how I decided to not like, yeah, kind of pursue a postdoc or like try and carve out like a career in academia. I guess like for me, so like one of the reasons why I did a collaborative doctoral partnership was because I, like, although I did want to become an academic, I kind of in my mind, I was like, yeah, this is going to be pretty difficult. And I had this kind of other idea that maybe I could be like a researcher in like a cultural institution. I'd like previously worked for like an art and design studio, and I was like, maybe, you know, if I work with the Science Museum, I could get like, you know, I could help set up an exhibition or something, like work with collections and stuff. And but basically, like the first, I guess, 18 months of the PhD, I was like, yeah, again, wanted to be an academic. I didn't really know what that meant, like when I started the PhD, and then like you're in it, and then you're like, okay, I should probably look into this. And like the more I looked into it, the more I just like you had to do so much, like just the effort involved was like immense, like the precarity, just like all of this stuff like that people have mentioned. And I started becoming like quite like overwhelmed by like the mountain that I had to climb. And then at one point, like I kind of just said to myself, it was like, yeah, 18 months into the PhD, I just kind of said to myself, like, you don't have to do this. And I just remember like it was like a weight had been like lifted off of my shoulders. I was like, okay, yeah, this is like the right option for me. I'm just going to I'm just not going to pursue this. But then something else is like, well, what do you do at that point? Like, okay, so you're not going to be an academic, like what do you then choose to do? And I think like mapping out my options was like a really important process. And instead of kind of being like how do you see yourself, I was like, how am I spending, like how do I choose to spend my day doing the PhD? Like where is my focus? Like what do I enjoy doing? And like that really helped me like kind of build like a picture in my head of like the types of careers or like jobs which would be suitable for me. So yeah, I guess that's what I have to say.
No, that's great. And it's really interesting, of course, to think you're making the decision to leave academia, and a lot of people at some point will make that decision, and others, of course, won't. And actually thinking, oh gosh, okay, so now what, if I've chosen not to be an academic, what am I doing the PhD for? What else am I actually going to get out of this? And actually having that conversation is really important. So thank you for that, Sarah. And Michelle.
Thanks, Rachel. Something you said there actually was really interesting for me when you said about why am I doing the PhD, because this might help some people, because I didn't really intend to go outside academia. It was just that it happened, and I kept realizing I was getting more and more experience in public history and none in academia. And so the next thing I knew, 10 years had gone by, but I was still writing articles and still having them published. But what I found is that teaching adult learners and informal learners is it's useful to have that PhD, particularly for me as a woman teaching often older men. To have the doctorate really helps. It does give you a degree of authority that you might not have otherwise. So that's useful. But then the other thing that I've noticed is that when I am teaching people, I can't usually direct them towards my published work because it's behind a paywall. So that's really fascinating too, because that makes you realize that if you want your history to get out there, if you want a lot of people to read the stuff and enjoy what you do, then you can only teach and educate outside the academy, because if you're doing it within the academy, it tends to stay within the academy. And so for me, that's what really kind of signed the deal and stopped me wanting even to be within academia, was this realization that I was reaching so many more people, engaging so many more people of all different ages, backgrounds, abilities in history, and people who are really genuinely excited and enthused by it. They weren't doing it because, you know, they felt they had to do a degree or there was a qualification they needed to do. It was just for fun for most of them. And so it made it a really enjoyable and fulfilling experience that I don't know that people within academia are getting. Certainly from, you know, my colleagues on Twitter, it just looks like an absolute, you know, ball of fire and awfulness. So yeah, I certainly don't regret going outside academia and still being able to use my history to teach and help people to discover the past through archive materials.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It's actually really important to actually say, yeah, I'm actually still using my degree and in effect still teaching and still learning and actually reaching perhaps the audiences we all actually have gone into this to reach at the. And very few of us, I think, will have actually gone into this thinking, I just want to reach, you know, certain professors. And most people actually want to spread their research and share it. And actually, you're right, the world of academia is in some ways increasing, in some ways opening. debatable, about actually what's being taken out into the sort of public realm, as well, in the public development. And actually a lot of the sort of public development and public facing work that you guys are all doing actually really shows how important that is in terms of using your skills and expertise beyond just your PhD to actually communicate and sort of broaden out history and heritage more into the sort of the wider audience. And actually that links very, very nicely. So thank you, Michelle. You've ideally segued into this first question. I'll park my other question because I am conscious of time and would like to get to the questions in our chat. And I'm going to start with James Squire's question, which links a little, as I say, to this. And he says, what do you think of the current situation for history or the sort of humanities in general because of COVID? Are there really the same kinds of opportunities for careers linked to history post-COVID as there may have been before 2020? And then he adds, judging from the limits on PhD funding the past couple of years, it doesn't really seem like it. Gabby.
Yeah, so I don't want this to come across as very pessimistic. I'm hoping it's going to come across as a realistic response. I do think there are less opportunities available. I will talk in a UK context as well. I'm not sure how international we might, if we've got speakers that maybe are outside the UK at the moment and doing distant kind of learning or so on. I think COVID has shrunk the market, but it was already a shrinking market. I think many academics would say the job market has been shrinking for some time, and I think COVID has amplified that to some extent. But what I have seen with other universities is actually the growth in actually public history positions. So for example, Leeds, City, Edinburgh, and I think there's a couple of other, perhaps Russell Group universities that are actually pushing outwards in terms of having public history and digital humanities as their markets, as their areas of development for jobs. So it's not to say there are no jobs out there, but actually the kind of themes or areas of specialism which are now becoming available, perhaps changing, and whether that's necessarily just because of COVID or whether that's more because of that's their focus at the moment, is perhaps something to bear in mind, is that there are kind of thematic trends in the job market.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, that'll be the case pre and post COVID. There'll always be, as you say, thematic trends in reacting to certain events and things like this. Michelle.
I was going to offer a slightly more optimistic interpretation, which is just that I'd say in the heritage sector, because of the way things are funded with the Arts Council and also National Lottery Fund, I think there are still lots of opportunities, and also it's a sector where a lot of people move on very frequently, and because it's quite a female-dominated sector, there's always lots and lots of maternity cover posts, and they don't seem to have gone anywhere. So I'd say within heritage and cultural sector, I think there's still lots and lots of openings available. That's my position.
Thank you. And of course, if you're happy to widen the boat a little bit, we've obviously got some of our speakers coming from sort of policy sides and things like this. So you don't necessarily have to just think it has to be directly history and heritage. You can actually end up doing history and heritage related things, or even transferable skill things in a lot of other jobs as well. As they were saying, particularly I think Hannah was saying, they have all sorts of departments on all sorts of both sort of institutions, heritage institutions, and even companies are now starting to hire historians. I think was it Lloyd's Bank that has now got a historian doing a history of Lloyd's Bank on their books. So you can get all sorts of interesting and weird and wonderful connections to history and heritage that you may not have thought about. I think people are becoming more conscious about their buildings and where their sort of history of their companies and where it's all coming from, and also promoting that, particularly in terms of sustainability, longevity, trust and honesty, things like this that are things that people are interested in. So I'll just try and end this on a positive note, as Michelle was saying, although it is important to heed what Gabby was saying in terms of thinking about trends, particularly in job opportunities, and the fact that certain areas are shrinking. No thanks to, and I'm pretty sure this is one of the things that James was referring to, government intervention on the institutional side. We have Becky next, and would you like to ask if you could share some tips for approaching non-academic job interviews, particularly after years spent focusing on sort of academia or molding yourself to be an academic. So I suppose it's getting out of that mindset of being interviewing as an academic and interviewing for those non-academic jobs. Jessica.
Yeah, I think I'm relatively qualified to speak about this both personally and professionally. So I think just in terms of both job applications themselves and interviews, I think one good thing to do when you're starting off, or even before you're even getting close to submission, before you're thinking about the next thing, to really have a look at job advertisements in the kind of sector that you're thinking about moving into, and start to collect those, download them, save them to your computer. Even if you're not even close to being at that stage, you get a feel of the kind of pattern of skills and the way skills are talked about on those advertisements. I mean, this applies in academia too, but it's particularly useful when you don't have a real frame of reference to go on. And I mean, always with job applications or interviews, it's about framing the skills that you have in terms of what they want. So you absolutely have the skills that employers want: analysis, synthesis, presentations, teaching, research, all of these kind of things. You can do them. It's just learning how to talk about them in a different way. So you probably also have some kind of team at your university who can help you with this, whether that's a careers team, whether that's a kind of research or development team like what I do. Sometimes they're called centers for doctoral studies, postdoctoral studies, something like that. There's probably some people who can help. Supervisors, some of them are great, some of them, through no fault of their own, haven't been outside in the world beyond academia in quite some time. So they may or may not be a good source of advice, but someone in your university probably has that advice, or send me an email. I'll put my email in the link in the chat. So yeah, it's really thinking about always mirroring the language in job adverts, sitting down with yourself and kind of going, okay, what actually is a PhD? What is it that I do that's not about the sort of content, not about what you're trying to argue, but rather about the how you get to your argument, and how you assemble the evidence, how you present that evidence, how you communicate that evidence. So all of those things you do already, and it's just about making that shift to talking about them in a different way.
Brilliant, thank you, Jessica. Hannah.
I would absolutely agree with everything Jessica just said. And I think to add as well, you not only do you have so many skills from the history PhD that can help in non-academic job applications, but also, you know, retail jobs you've worked, or volunteering that you've done. Kind of, I think just looking at the sum of your experience, including things that you've done before or alongside your PhD, there's often ways to draw examples from different parts of your life that can support the different requirements in a job description. And I would say every non-academic job I've been in, before and after the PhD, really the most important kind of characteristics to have been having good communication, good project management, being efficient and enthusiastic. And so any ways that you can find to demonstrate that, especially in your interview, I think are really helpful. I would also say that I would encourage you not to be deterred if you don't fit every single requirement of a job description. And I think the best example I can give of that from my own experience is that when I applied for the grants coordinator role in research services, I had no prior experience with anything finance related. I had public engagement experience, and it was on a public engagement team, this role, but I had no prior finance experience. And during the interview, the first part of the interview was a timed skills test. And one of the skills was an Excel skills test. And now I can't even remember what the specific task was, but I had no idea how to do it, like absolutely none. And so I just opened a blank sheet in Excel and wrote, apologies, I don't know how to do this, but I'm a quick learner. And then in the interview, you know, when they asked, like, what are some things that you'd like to develop during your time in the role if you get it? And I just kind of, I tried to frame it as positively as possible, and just said, well, you know, your skills test had just taught me that I need to work on my Excel, so I'd really want to develop those skills. And I got the job anyways, and I thought for sure I wouldn't after that. So I would just definitely encourage you to go for things, even if you're not 100% qualified, and to look at all the ways that you can kind of repackage skills and experience from your academic life into other roles, because there usually is a lot of ways that you can make those fit what they're looking for.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really useful to sort of think about what can you be taught in the job and what is something that you've gained in other areas. And as Hannah's saying, Excel can be taught. It's not something that you can't learn on the job, whereas your skills in public engagement will have been much more valuable in terms of that's a much bigger body of experience that would have been much harder to teach somebody. So I think you're right. I think it's really important to think about those kind of things. So thank you so much. Sarah.
Yeah, I'm just like looking at the question again. So it was on interviews. But yeah, like the kind of the job application, like CV, like personal statement, everything's kind of all wrapped up in that. Like a good and harsh piece of advice I got was like, your thesis is only ever going to be like one line on your CV, even though it's like taking up all of your time. It's literally just like one line. And like in an interview, I found that it's like an icebreaker. They're like, what's your research project on? You explain it, and then they're like, cool. And then it's just parks, and then you talk about like a whole bunch of other stuff. And I found personally that it was like all of the other stuff I did in my PhD, like my internship, like setting up conferences, teaching. I did some like, I guess like kind of like policy work, like in the university as well. Like I was a student rep and things like that. So that's the kind of stuff that they're interested in. I mean, there might be stuff like in your like research that you also want to bring up. It kind of depends on your role. Like if you're applying for like an analytical role, yeah, you're gonna want to talk about like your research methods and stuff like that kind of experience that you have. But like the civil service have like this whole like success profiles thing, and which is really interesting. And like if you apply for the civil service, you're probably going to have to like spend a lot of time like looking into this process, because it's like very specific, and they want you to apply to their jobs in a very, very specific way. So like success profiles could be like working together, delivering at pace, like managing change, or I can't remember like what they are specifically, but they're going to want you to provide evidence of you having done those things. And I find that, yeah, you're going to have to think quite creatively about what you've done in the PhD. And also just like, yeah, speak to people who are like not historians, who are like not academics, who are like in the field that you're wanting to go into. I like ended up speaking to like my brother's boyfriend's best friend about something. I'd never like spoken to her like before, and I just wanted to know like, yeah, like about her journey from being like yeah, how like she got into her role. And then also speak to people about like yeah, like know your worth. Just because you've done a PhD, it doesn't mean you're like you have to take an entry-level role. Like there are loads of things that you can do. Yeah, you can learn on the job. Like you, I don't know, you can definitely pick stuff up, and so like ask people. Like I would not have applied to this job unless somebody told me that being a PhD student made me qualified for this job, because I was like, oh, I can't do that. Like it's like way too like above my like level of experience or whatever. So yeah, and then just be like enthusiastic in the interview as well, but kind of appreciate that like you might want to talk about your thesis a lot and other people might not be so interested in it.
Thank you. Yeah, I always save the well, it's the MA at the moment, but it will be the thesis for the can you tell me about a time that you finished a project from start to finish and how you went through that project? Well, so I always save it for that, because you don't have to go, as you say, into the content, but you can talk then all about those, how you came up with the question and did the research and synthesize, etc. And that you can also bang in there that you're actually pretty good at writing. So that's always good. But yeah, I think it's really useful to think about the other stuff you're doing around your PhD, especially as a lot of people will be doing all of this and maybe not realizing some of the skills they're getting from that as well. So that's great. Thank you, Sarah. Michelle.
Yeah, I think don't underestimate how prescriptive interviews can be outside of academia. I think Sarah mentioned about profiles with the civil service, and what I've found from sitting on interview panels is that we have these score charts and it does get reduced to the state of a number. You know, that's what it is. It's not so, and you're so used to a PhD, it's all about describing what you can do, and it's very wordy. But what people want outside of the sector is things to be very brief, to the point, only address what they've asked you to address in an interview question, but also in your application form. Bullet points are better than proper long sentences, which is something that's really hard to get your head around as a PhD student. And also, I think what Hannah said about demonstrating what you can do. No one wants to see waffle in an application. When you're on the other side of the process, you've got piles of papers to read through. What you want is someone that's to the point, has clearly looked at your website, knows and cares about your organisation, which is a horrible thing to hear because it means you've all got to do research for each job you apply for, but it really, really makes all the difference. And the final thing that I would say about all of this is that I've interviewed for so many roles for people, and often I've wanted to give it to someone I haven't been able to because they haven't scored enough points and someone else has, but I know they could have done the job equally as well. So if you don't get the job, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have done it. It just means that on that day there happened to be an applicant that scored, 0.5 perhaps more than you did, but you only have to get the job once. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you. And it is really useful to actually think about the fact that just because you didn't get it doesn't mean that you weren't right or good or anything. It's just life. There's just, people always can potentially have some tiny little thing that has made the difference. And it's one of the reasons we just have to sort of persevere and keep calm and carry on, as they say. And that would apply to both academic and non-academic jobs. But at least the variety can come more from the non-academic sector. And Matt.
I would just add that our equipment is also on a scoring system, usually, and we tend to place a lot of emphasis on sort of evidence and sort of cold, hard, real world experience rather than conceptual understanding, if you like. So they could be quite small. I say real world, inclusive of academia and doing a PhD within that. Small practical examples, which are clearly articulated, would be more likely what we were looking for, rather than a lot of sort of conceptual understanding of something. Services that was already made, and there being resources in the universities that will help you and coach you on that, I would see as being very valuable. There's a technique called the STAR technique: situation, task, action, result, or something like that, which helps you put what you did and what you did specifically into a clear framework which you can articulate, and that's what we would be looking for that evidence. But it could be something drawn from the PhD, but something quite minor which is clearly articulated would be what we would look for over a lot of demonstrations of conceptual understanding. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really useful to think about, particularly the STAR method. I think that is something that's really worth noting. And also that you don't always have to have a massive example for everything. The fact that actually something really minor, well explained, can do the job just as well, depending on what it is. So that's actually really helpful. Thank you. Just actually, while Matt's there, he's reminded me, there are a couple of links in the chat. I think one was by Jess for jobs.ac.uk, thinking about those sort of academic adjacent sort of careers. They have both sort of academic positions, but there's a section below that also looks at the sort of higher education type roles, administrative engagement and things like that. And Matt's also put a link and a small plug for a role available in his team, and to have a look for job opportunities with the research councils, and also yes, the Research Council. So you might be thinking about the Economic and Social, or the Arts and Humanities, or UKRI more generally. So just to note that those links are in the chat at the moment. We have got a question about graduate visas, but as it's been briefly mentioned in the chat, and I think there's been some communications going there, we'll move on briefly and hopefully we'll have time to maybe address that more in a moment, just because it's been addressed already by some of our speakers in the chat. Let's see. So we've got one from Cora saying, so many jobs outside of academia ask for experience in the industry or the sector. For example, 2 years of proven admin experience or work in policy. A true entry level job seems really hard to find if you've only ever been in academia. How do you write applications and filter roles with this kind of thing in mind? And we'll just have some sort of brief hopefully brief responses to that, if we can. Hannah.
I would say that I was able to get some of those kind of years of experience during the PhD. I mean, this will depend a bit on the context and exactly what they're looking for, but in terms of project management, you know, I had some part-time contracts with the history faculty during my PhD, and I was able to kind of use that as an example of project management. Same thing if you've ever organized a conference or a symposium. You know, there are some ways to point to admin experience that you've had if you've had kind of any other responsibilities as part of your PhD. There's sometimes ways to frame that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Michelle.
Yeah, I back up what Hannah's saying. I was involved with History Lab Plus, for example. When I was doing my PhD, I also was an associate of the Raphael Samuel History Centre. I ran a history club for young people on a voluntary basis called the Adventurers History Club for 6 years. Gave me lots of experience. So I would say spend maybe just an hour one evening thinking about what you could do and what you'd like to do. Think of one organisation you could get involved with. You could volunteer at a local museum or archive, or get involved as a trustee, something like that. There's an organisation I think called Young Trustees. They're worth looking at. They advertise lots of opportunities on their website. So I would say just pick one thing that you could do on a voluntary basis that will give you some of that experience. And then exactly as Hannah said, kind of not puff it up, but you know, a little experience can go a long way. So I think that's what I would suggest for sure. And that will give you a little bit of something to start with.
That's great, thank you very much. And I just want to add on to that Gabby's comment in the chat about local government often having lots of opportunities for admin roles, and sometimes they take without experience. So that's another avenue that you could also explore alongside Michelle's options as well. So thank you. Brilliant. So I'm just going to go back and see. We've got another one that Cora's got related about keywords. Is there any particular keywords you think we need to use to search for jobs? Apparently, she was saying that it can throw up hundreds of history teacher roles and very little else. And I think it might be perhaps partly to do with where she's searching as well, maybe, as well as the key word. I'm just wondering if anyone had anything to add on that, beyond, of course, the links jobs.ac.uk and the UKRI, which Matt has already mentioned. Hannah.
Yeah, I found the idea of figuring out what keywords to choose very overwhelming. And so my advice would be to search by employer, not by keyword. So looking at the jobs.ac.uk, for example, if you're looking for roles within universities, or I did a lot of searches on the UKRI and the specific research councils, job boards, and then just kind of selecting filters within an institution's job page rather than you know, using keywords on LinkedIn, for example, because to me that was hard to kind of target correctly. So I instead just went with, okay, I had kind of a spreadsheet of different institutions and then the links to their job pages, and then just checked them all on rotation.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that. Jessica.
Yeah, I tend, when not in looking for academic or academic adjacent jobs, to be a Guardian Jobs fan, mainly because the sectors that are on there tended to be the ones that I thought might suit me, teaching or charity sector or heritage, those kinds of things do end up there. And I would say, you know, if you don't know what keywords to use, start filtering by category. So, you know, what is the job role that you're thinking, the job category that you're thinking about? Is there a place that you want to be? I mean, that's one of the advantages of moving beyond academia, is you have more control over things like geography. So if you're, and then I think LinkedIn, I find a little tricky, to be honest, in the sense that it does love a keyword, and it can sometimes learn what you like from the algorithms, but other times not. So I think the truth is that to just be out there on all these different sites, I'm afraid that it is stressful. There's a lot of research involved, as Michelle said. But if you do sort of a little and often, I think it becomes, and if you start, you know, before you're getting to that panic period, then you start building in much more proactive, and you feel much more in control than when it's coming right down to it. So yeah, that would be my thought.
Brilliant, thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, I don't think UKRI has a especially consistent approach in terms of where our jobs get posted, other than always on the main kind of UKRI owned job website that I referred to. So I think it's finding the right type, getting a sense of which job sites in particular are throwing up the most useful results for you, and then some filtering, and then unfortunately some laborious going through and reading things. And it's something we or I could do better on, having a clear title, and not using acronyms in the titles of jobs and stuff like that, so people actually know what it's about. But recruitment often isn't done very well, largely because the people doing it, guilty as charged, are not professional recruitment people, so they don't really know what they're doing. So I think unfortunately there's no avoiding some of the hard work once you've got a sense of where the best places to look are.
Thank you very much, and very true. Yes, of course, we're thinking, oh gosh, we want to find everything, but actually we have to think about, well, what are they actually advertising and how are they advertising it? And sometimes the two don't necessarily marry very well, which is one of the reasons it's really good, actually. I think the advice that Hannah and Jessica were saying is go to the site of the actual place you're interested in. You're more likely to find those more sort of specialist titled things that actually might be very relevant. We have got a few minutes now if we want to talk about the visas. If we just keep it quite brief, just so I can end with one of the more general questions. And then hopefully if you want to talk a bit more about visas in any depth, I think it's Hannah and Jessica put their, very kindly put their emails in there, so you can talk to them more specifically about that. Hannah.
So Jessica put a fantastic link in the chat to the graduate visa. And so that's, I had a look at that link, and it's now 3 years. It was one when I was eligible for it. But yes, essentially, if you finish a PhD in the UK, you're now able to get a 3-year work visa. I did the equivalent of getting a 1-year work visa and then a 2-year visa because I happen to be Canadian, and that's one of a few countries that has a 2-year work visa agreement with the UK. But the point I'm getting at is that the graduate work visa is a pretty golden opportunity to not have to have a specific employer sponsor. So that was how I was able to take the 2 half-time jobs. I saw in Felicia's message that she was kind of talking about how to deal when you've got multiple part-time roles. That's the reason I've just started a new job, is that my current visa is ending. And so I needed a new one where the employer would be able to sponsor me. That's more challenging for professional services roles as opposed to academic ones. But it is possible, and it just depends on the coding of the job. And so that was, I'm keeping an eye on the time here, I'll be very short, but that was something I was keeping in mind from right when I finished the PhD, was that I wanted to have the benefit of being with a large institution, because they're more likely to be on the approved list of visa sponsors. And they also have dedicated teams who work on staff immigration and can help you with that process. And so taking the opportunity of the graduate visa, it gives you a couple of years to build work experience, kind of, become further entrenched in an organization, so that you are more likely to be successful applying for a role that comes with visa sponsorship further down the road, rather than having to cold apply somewhere completely different that you have no experience with. But Felicia, I've seen your email address in the chat, and I'm happy to talk further by email later.
Thank you. Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to add quickly?
Yeah, I won't repeat what Hannah said because it's largely my experience as well. It's worth saying though, forewarned is forearmed. So make sure you're pretty familiar with what kinds of roles qualify and all the different categories and levels. And it's you develop a kind of expertise in these things if you're in that situation. And also there are plenty of sectors. I mean, if we were to, be having someone in the financial sphere or, kind of private corporations or academia proper in terms of research and teaching, many of those kinds of things are a much smoother way to get your visa situation sorted. It's when you're in these kind of, unfortunately, the kind of professional services, heritage-y, what we might think of as slightly oversubscribed areas, it's a lot more challenging. But that new graduate visa has gotten much more generous. So hopefully you'll have a better experience than maybe we did.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just going to end our session today with final question. And I've just something a bit more general is sort of what would you advise, sort of one thing you might advise a PhD student to do to prepare for the world of work? So we'll just go around and just say one thing. If someone wants to put their hand up if they've got somewhere to start, because I don't want to pick on someone who and they're like, I have no idea what I want to say. So just one thing quickly, sort of top tip, what you think PhDs should do to prepare for the world of work. Anybody volunteering to go first?
I think it's difficult perhaps to keep it to one thing in a sense, but yeah, maybe just use your friends, especially those who've got experience in and outside of academia. Use them for proofreading, checking CVs, and all the rest of it, and just as a support network as well. I think that getting different bits of advice can be really useful, so you've not just got an in academia support network.
Yeah, I appreciate it's quite a loaded question. Just more to keep these sort of ends sort of going quite quick. Michelle.
Yeah, I think just spend a bit of time thinking about what you really love most of all about the PhD. Is it the research? Is it the teaching? Is it the writing? Because that will help you clarify what area you want to move into, because they're all quite different things, and you'll just bundle them up together without realizing which one of them it is that you want to prioritize, and that might have an impact on which area you move into afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah.
I kind of wanted to echo some of Michelle's statements actually about like writing applications and then doing interviews. Like, don't overthink it. Like, you do not have to be like, you don't have to intellectualize the process. Like, be brief, be to the point. Think about what the person on the other side is interested in hearing. They want to hire somebody, like make that process easy for them. Yeah, I guess that would be my main piece of advice.
Brilliant. Matt.
I think that point about looking at job adverts for potential careers and looking at the criteria that are being required, and then starting to try and map that to things that you've done in the PhD, and probably you'll find that some of those you can already say and demonstrate you're doing very well. But the earlier you do that, the more time you have to seek out experiences, however minor, just to try and work across some of those. And I'd also say we'll all be working till 70, and it all works itself out in the long run. Can feel hard, but it does get better, and careers can take time to develop, so don't lose sight of that.
Thank you. Jessica.
Oh, was that me? Sorry, my internet cut out for a second. I mean, I think I would probably, what I ended up doing was taking a whole life approach, not just a career approach. Basically, what did I want my life to be like? What did I want to be spending my time on? Who else was in my life that I needed to support, or I wanted to be with, or, what else, how important were various life aspects to me? And then I kind of made choices that would facilitate that rather than the other way around, basically. I guess my piece of advice, or it's not true for everyone, but I wanted my career to be supporting my life rather than my life to be in service of my career. So that was what kind of helped me. What do I actually want my life to look like in the shorter and longer term?
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Hannah.
I agree with, well, all of those, but particularly Jessica so much. But in order to not repeat it, I will say I would suggest starting a list now of evidence, picking up on earlier comments from the panelists about evidence in applications. Kind of anytime you do something, just kind of jot it down so that when you need to write an application, you can kind of come back to that and look at different ways to repackage and reframe that experience, but having examples already to hand rather than trying to recall from scratch, 4 years of your doctorate and all the different things you've done and how to describe them. It's helpful to just start jotting those down now.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll pass you over to Ellen to end our session.
Yeah, Rachel, you're doing such an amazing job. I didn't want to sort of chime in, but yeah, thank you so much
to help with the final farewells.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists. I've been furiously taking notes, so I've been looking to this side. And thank you to everyone who's still here, who's attended and offered wonderful questions. The recording will be sent to Gemma at the IHR, and she'll put this up on the web, on our IHR website. So please look to that and share it. And if you want to refer back to anything, but yeah, come to History Lab next week. I believe it's Emma Marshall who's speaking on early modern history. So check out our schedule. But otherwise, thank you so much to our speakers, to our attendees, and importantly, again, to Rachel for organising this. I just did some admin. So yes, thanks everyone, and hopefully see you at History Lab soon.